This short video is intended to help you better understand the Common Core State Standards for Mathematics. In North Carolina, we also call these the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. When we talk about the Common Core State Standards for Mathematics, there are two sets of standards. There are the content standards and the math practice standards, okay? So when we talk about the content standards, those are K-8 standards, which are presented by grade level. In other words, in the content standards, every standard is different from grade level to grade level. The high school standards are presented by conceptual theme rather than grade level. So when I'm thinking about the content standards, I think about what we are going to be teaching in the classroom. In kindergarten, the content standards would be things like counting and adding. When I think about fifth grade, the content standards would focus more on fractions. The opposite of the content standards, or I guess you would say they work together, so not really opposite, so just say the cousin maybe of the content standards are the mathematical practices. And those mathematical practices carry across all of the grade levels. In other words, they are the same from kindergarten all the way through high school. And really, if you think about it, even into college and careers. And so those mathematical practices describe the habits of mind of mathematically expert students. With my students, I often tell them that these are things that great mathematicians do. So when we look at those Common Core State Standards, the content standards and the practice standards a little more closely, those content standards are K-8 standards that are different from grade level to grade level, and they are the what we do in math, okay? Then we have those practice standards, and those are the same from grade level to grade level, and they focus more on the how we do mathematics. So these are those 8 practice standards I was just talking about. Remember, these are the how students do mathematics, and these are the same for all grade levels. Those math practice standards are make sense of problems and persevere in solving them, reason abstractly and quantitatively, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others, model with mathematics, use appropriate tools strategically, attend to precision, look for and make use of structure, and look for and express regularity in repeated reasoning. These 8 practice standards go along with all the math lessons that we teach students in K-8. So I wanted to take a look at a specific, we'll say math lesson that students might be doing and see how those content standards and those practice standards work together. So I'm going to look at the kindergarten standard, which is KOA A1. When I'm reading that, that means kindergarten. The strain is operations and algebra. It's in the first cluster, which is that second A, and then it's the first standard. And in kindergarten, students are asked to solve addition and subtraction word problems and add and subtract within 10. Okay, so that's the content they're working on. The practice standards they're going to be working on at the same time are make sense of problems and persevere in solving them, and construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. So in order to do all of these things at once, students might be solving a problem like this. Hayden had 5 fish. Some fish were red and some fish were blue. What combinations of blue and red fish could Hayden have? So in this particular open-ended problem, students are going to be practicing adding and subtracting within 10, but they're also going to be given the opportunity to make sense of problems and persevere in solving them and construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. They'll specifically be critiquing the reasoning of others when they're going to be sharing their solution paths. And one student might have only a few solutions, while another one might have found 4 or 5 different combinations. So when they're talking with one another, that's when they're going to be constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. Let's look at a similar example, but from 5th grade. So when I look at 5th grade, they're going to be using the same mathematical practices, but their content standard is going to change. So this time, those 5th graders are going to be working on solving problems involving addition and subtraction of fractions, referring to the same whole, including cases of unlike denominators. So I've given them a similar problem to work through, but you'll be able to see that the content is very different. So here's the problem. Hayden had a 1-cup container of oil and water. What combinations of oil and water could be in the container? So this problem is going to ask students to work on solving a word problem with fractions. And you'll notice that this is an open-ended problem. That means there's lots and lots of answer solutions, even more than that problem we looked at earlier. And so you can see the opportunity for students to have to persevere in solving this problem and also to be able to share their thinking with their peers. So here we are back to those 8 practice standards, which you're going to be focusing on mostly in this module. I wanted for you to take an opportunity to look at them in a different way. I find this way a little bit easier to think about in terms of remembering those practice standards. These practice standards will be in our work all semester long. So it's really important that you have a deep understanding of these practice standards. I would suggest that you write them in your math journal, probably either on the first page or the very last page, because you're going to constantly be asked to go back to these standards and describe how students are using them. So when I look at these standards, they can actually be grouped, okay? So if I look, practice number 1 and 6 can be grouped together, and these are overarching habits of mind of a productive math thinker, okay? So these are things that all math thinkers do in everything problem that they're solving. So then if I look at the green, those are about reasoning and explaining. And that's where students have to reason abstractly and quantitatively and construct the viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. Then when I look at those math practices in red, those are about modeling and using tools. So modeling with mathematics and using appropriate tools strategically. Those last 2 practice standards are about seeing structure and making generalizations or rules about mathematics. And so the 2 standards that go together are look for and make use of structure, and look for and express regularity in repeated reasoning. So I hope that in this presentation, you have got a clear understanding of the differences between the content standards for mathematics and the mathematical practice standards. In this module, your focus will be on the mathematical practice standards. Please feel free to email me with any questions that you have as you work through this module.